Good morning, everybody. If it's morning where you are, it is where I am. Welcome to the show. My name is Dale, and I am the host of Coffee Time Again, where we expose the truth. Today, we're exposing the truth with Jeremy. I can't pronounce his last name, so I'm not going to butcher it. So anyway, we're
McMullen.
going to be. Thank you, Jeremy. And I'm going to uh, let Jeremy introduce himself and tell us a little bit about what's going on and why he's here. And we will get started now. Jeremy, take it away.
All right. My name is Jeremy McMullen, and I'm originally from Pennsylvania, living here now in Ohio with my wife and my family, my three kids. And yeah, just completed a book this past fall and was out released in January called A Nation at a Crossroads, Gettysburg for yesterday and today. And really, at the heart of the book is this look at not only just the battle itself and the focus being able to look at the battle and see God's hand involved in the battle for one thing, and try to tell that story. But honestly, when you look into any battle, but particularly Gettysburg wasn't just the 3 days. There was a lead up. There's all of the political intrigue going on for decades beforehand that all play a part. And then there are the military aspects that all led up to Gettysburg that I try to dive into and give you some information on of that you can see how I honestly believe with through all the research and looking at everything, you can see God's hand guiding and leading in all of the steps that ultimately then led to Gettysburg, and then go through the battle in some detail and some of the particular stories to demonstrate God's hand in that battle. And then I talk about, in essence, why it had to happen. What was, again, the political nature of things, what was happening. And then, so that was really the beginning of the focus of the book. But as I dove into it, I was realizing that there was more and more correlation to what we were experiencing in our own modern times. And so I tried to then draw the link between that, really our Civil War, where you can hear it in the news even right now with what's happened in the last week or so. The Civil
Mhm.
War hasn't really gone away. It's just gone into hiding in many respects, waiting for another day. Is because we're facing a spiritual enemy. We're constantly in this battle, and I think a lot of the what was the focus of our Civil War wasn't truly what was the cause, what was really at the heart of the issue. And so I dive into that and then tie that into why we are where we are today, because it was something that we never really dealt with, back in the 19th century, and that it is rooted itself within our nation and is now exposing itself all over again. And it's, I think, at
Mhm.
one last opportunity in which to combat it and overcome it. And if we do that, I think we're going to see, you know, this nation experience a rebirth and a renewal like we never could have imagined. If we don't learn the lessons and we don't apply it, we're going to be facing something truly devastating.
Yeah, I totally agree. I've been saying for years that there's going to be another civil war if we're not real careful.
Yeah. I think we're actually,
And
technically, we're already in one, really. It's
I
just we
think so
don't
too,
have
with all the.
it.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that. But one of the taglines on this show is the culture that forgets its history has no future.
Yeah. It's so good. So
So,
true.
what you're doing with Gettysburg alone is just remarkable. Excuse me. What got you started? Well, excuse me, now I can't talk. Why Gettysburg?
Well, for one, it's always been a battle that's intrigued me since at a young age, growing up in Pennsylvania, but it's always been the one that we talk about really with the Civil War. I mean, there's some others that are obviously very, very important. We can't really overlook any of them really, but
Yeah.
there's always been Gettysburg is seen as the turning point, and honestly, that was kind of the beginning of this process. Was asking the question, well, why Gettysburg? Why not anywhere else? Why this rolling fields in southern Pennsylvania? Why did the battle have to happen here? And because I think so often we just look at things and oh, they just happened. They just came together that way. But if you step back and you look at and you ask that question, why? You start realizing, wow, there's deeper things going on here. And so I wanted to understand why Gettysburg is considered that turning point, and again, why did it have to happen in that particular region?
Okay, I get you on that. I had a question in my mind. Gettysburg, and there were many battles,
Hmm.
but Gettysburg seems to have been the turning point that got us going. And I agree with you when you said earlier that if we don't bring it together and learn our lesson, we're going to be facing a mess in this country, and we're already in a mess.
Yeah.
We need to find. So, do you have any way that we can come together? In your book, did you bring anything up that would bring us together? So
Well,
there's this divisiveness.
well, that's the challenge, right? I mean, it's very much a spiritual battle, whether you agree with that or not. Is That's just the nature of things. We have a fallen nature. We, there's we either want to embrace the idea of there being a God or we don't. And so the interesting thing with Gettysburg and diving into it is if we'll take a step back and we'll be honest and we'll be open to it, I think God really kind of gave a blueprint of how the nation can be brought together if we are willing to embrace those ideas. And because you see it in the stages of the battle. I just thought there were so many little intriguing aspects. We used the Union Army used the cupola on top of the Lutheran seminary to
Mhm.
help give visibility for the early morning stages of the battle on the first day. And it just really spoke to me of there's a place for our institutions, which is what the Lutheran seminary represents. But if we make our institutions our God, if we hold on to them to no end, the Union position was strong using that in the early mornings, but then it was being threatened with quickly being overwhelmed and overrun by the superior Confederate forces that were on the field at that moment. So how long do you hold on to your institutions before you have to retreat to stronger, higher ground? And that's exactly what they did. And the higher, stronger ground in the case of humanity is the truth of God, standing on God's word, standing on his ground. That is the stronger ground. But if we are reliant upon our own man-made institutions to save us, to combat the evils around us, we're going to get overwhelmed. It's just not going to happen. But even when we then retreat to that stronger, higher ground, the other stories, the interesting intrigues that you see there is that you see these individual units and brigades all having to stand their ground firm. And in the case of, say, the 20th Maine and some other groups throughout the battle, they were the end of the line. If they gave in, if they faltered, if they failed, there was the opportunity to be overrun. And that's what we face, each of us in our own personal lives, is this battle to stand our ground. And if we give in, if we give way, surrendering the high ground of God's truth, that's really what the battle is all for, is the high ground, that high ground of moral truth and everything else. If we give way on that ground, it's lost.
I tend to agree. I'm very spiritual. I am deeply religious. Um, but I agree with you about that higher ground of God is the way of peace.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, that's the only way that there is really peace, is
Yeah.
when you embrace God's truth as the truth. There,
Mhm.
you then have a common ground, as you're saying, and there's your
Even though
peace.
we have X number of denominations that have their own, they're battling too. So you got to be able to bring them together.
Yeah.
You
Yep.
know,
Absolutely.
because you got this church saying, yeah, we're the way of the Lord, and everybody else is going to go to hell. If you don't do it our way. And I think it's wrong that they take that attitude.
Yeah. I mean, it's all about Christ. It's all about
Right.
focusing on surrounding yourself in following Christ and following that example that He set of a servant leader. And so often we don't see that. It's
No.
we know better, we know best, follow our ways. They might be wrapped around God's truth in certain respects, but there's still very much our own take on a situation, our own certain feelings on a moment, and then we create denominations based upon that in some respect.
Right. That's kind of a way because I'm an Episcopalian. Episcopalians were started after the Civil American Revolution. So to get rid of the Church of England, basically is what we tried to get rid of when we became Episcopalians. And I can see that. That's what, well, a lot of denominations get started, and we see these fly-by-night prophets, so-called prophets, that set things up, and then they ended up places like Waco. And that's that's just part of the war.
Yeah, you set yourself up for so much problems when you just focus on the power. And I mean, hey, at the end of the day, you don't really possess the power. It's your being through your own choice. You are allowing God to move through you, the Holy Spirit to move through you. That's the power. It's you don't possess it. You're not wielding it.
Because I took a class on healing, on how to do healings for the Episcopals in California. And the way they describe it, there's a conduit. Bingo, here, the Jesus. And that's where the power comes from. So in that healing session, we learned that I'm not the healer. I'm just the conduit for the healer to do his job, meaning Jesus to do the healing.
Yeah.
And I think the same thing is true with what you're talking about.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's the only way really, you bring up a good point in the sense that I was talking with some people and, the natural thing when you cover topics like this, and then you get into correlating it to where we are in our current political climate and social climates and all culture and all that, the idea is, well, these problems are man-made, so man can fix them. And I was saying that to a number of them, it's like, yeah, they're man-made, and that's the problem. We need God to fix them. They're man-made because we took on a mantle that wasn't ours in determining what's going to be true and right and everything else. We need to humbly submit to the Lord's determination of what is right.
But pray to the Lord and do what He tells you to do.
Right.
And it's real simple. But getting people to do something like that is just real hard. Well, how do you pray? That isn't hard either. However, with getting today's climate compared to Gettysburg's political climate, we were engaged in a civil war during that. So how's the political climate between the two similar?
There was similar in the sense that if you look at the speeches of the day, and then you look at a lot of the speeches that we have for our own time, you see similarities in how they view people. Now, back in the 19th century, it was the blacks, African Americans, that they saw as secondary citizens. Not even they were. There had to be a compromise to make them even 3/5 of a man because of concerns over representative numbers or tax numbers. So that's where we get the 3/5 compromise. So they weren't even seen as full human beings on the same level or rank as anyone else. And so you see that kind of talk in speeches and everything. Slavery is a positive good. John Calhoun's speech and so forth. But then you move forward to today, and honestly, you hear a lot of the same kind of similarities. You have what was it? A couple months ago, I think it was like 80% of people believe that there is a two-tier justice system. There's those
Yes.
who are able to do what they want, and the rest of us, we couldn't even dream of getting away with what some of the other people do. So you start seeing the elements of there being an elite structure and the peasant structure, and it's the same mentality that slavery has never gone away. It's always existed.
Nope.
And so to say that we fought the battle of our Civil War over slavery is true, but the real issue was deeper than that. That was a terrible symptom of a deeper problem. And the fact of the matter is that we haven't dealt with that deeper problem, and
No.
we still have that symptom even to this day. It just looks a little different, but people see it, they feel it.
Are you familiar with President Wilson?
Yes, a bit. I haven't.
Well, I've done quite a study on Mr. Wilson, and I believe he set race relations back 150 years.
Oh, I wouldn't be. Yeah, I
He was
won't
a
argue with you
racist.
on that.
He was a racist. The military and the government was desegregated, and he resegregated the government and the military. Would set some of this mess right up to where we're at today.
Yep. Yeah. The issue, I'm not going to. I don't care about if I give it away, but to me, the issue that you see that I go through is the fact that the real issue that we have as a nation is liberty, because we've had thousands of years of no liberty. There was always a class structure. There were always those who ruled, and then there were always those who were ruled. And so when this nation is founded, it's uncharted territory. What does liberty really mean? And we just never, we understood that as an ideal, but in practice, that's where it really starts hitting the fallen nature of man. We start, you mean I have to treat that person the same as I want to be treated? Allow him to do that while I want to do that? Like, yeah, everyone has the same amount of freedom up until a point that it then steps on someone else's freedom. And that's the
Right.
dividing line. And it's an equal ideal. But
Yes.
That's an ideal, and actually doing it in practice is something totally different. And you had people like Wilson and others who they saw themselves as a step above. Well, how are you going to implement liberty and have policies based upon liberty when you already come at things from that point of view?
Yeah, we won't go into Wilson too deeply, but a lot of the things that he did that were just absolutely atrocious as far as relationships with minorities and women and stuff. It was just atrocious. So we don't need to go into it because I got a whole 3 podcasts that deal with Wilson. So I pretty well covered him.
Yeah, right.
Don't like the man. But Gettysburg was one of the major battles of the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a dividing point between us losing and us winning.
Very much.
But what did we win?
Time. I think honestly, that's if you really are honest and you step back and you look at it. Now, don't get me wrong. Okay, so that's not entirely true. We did advance the slavery issue, at least when it came to a race kind of basis, started to begin the work of its healing. I would say that that was a turning point. Even though the Civil War came to an end in 1865, I would say that Gettysburg was that turning point that helped to start bringing races together.
Mhm.
And I honestly, I do not believe that we have the division racially that we want to be, that we're told today. I don't think that we have the same, anywhere near the same kind of divisiveness that they had back in the 19th century, if you really,
Mhm.
really stop and think about it. But so, that was truly a benefit of what we did gain at the conclusion of the Civil War. But other than that, honestly, it was just time. I think that thought structure, that belief structure, kind of went into hiding. That was at the core root of the issues that led to the Civil
Mhm.
War. It kind of went into hiding. And then when you had other moments come about, such as the Second World War, and you really kind of saw a bit of unity at that point in time with the war effort. If anything, it bought time. It bought us an opportunity to, because if you think about it, we go from the Revolutionary War to 1812 to the Civil War. We have, in less than 100 years, three major battles that just bloody this
Yeah.
continent. And who's to say that we could have just kept going and still
Mhm.
have survived? So I think, uh, besides helping to improve race relations and starting that path forward, I think it bought time for us as a nation.
Do you think we've wasted some of that time?
Oh, for sure. For sure. But again, I think it still comes back to the idea of, because I didn't see it until diving into this. I always thought it was just really about slavery and states' rights. I can make that argument too. And I thought that those were kind of the core structures. But when I really stepped back and I was looking at it, it's like, well, those are actually more symptoms of a deeper problem of liberty. You don't like it when that person cuts you off in traffic. You want to have your immediate justice. You want it
Yeah.
your way. We all want it our way. We don't
Yeah.
want it equally the same way for everybody. We just don't, because that fights against our nature, our fallen sinful nature. We want it the way we want it. We don't care what anyone else wants. And when that's all brand new and you're trying to not just establish those as ideals for a nation as policy, but then with millions of citizens having to live that out, it's a very difficult situation. And uh, I think it is very much the issue that we never really identified and really honed in on, so that we could build upon that and identify our areas of weakness and our struggle. And we made it all about again, I'm sound like I'm diminishing slavery as an issue, but we focused on that when that's a symptom of a deeper problem of our fallen nature and everything else.
That's human nature. I used to be a drug and alcohol counselor, and devoting the primary issue to something else that is not as volatile to them is common. I mean, I had a lot of
Yep.
clients who just they approached the core issue 2 days before they got out of treatment. It took them
Right.
20 weeks to get to the point of saying, yes, this is my issue,
Yep.
because they're hiding behind, and that's what I think you're trying to say, is they're hiding behind something else to cover up, with each individual.
Well, you see it, I mean, right in Genesis, right? You
Oh,
see
yeah.
Adam and Eve pointing the fingers at each other and then pointing their fingers at the serpent. And
Yeah.
which is okay, but where's the finger bit pointed back at themselves?
Well, it
it
always is. It's
starts with
always
you.
three of them.
Yeah, yeah,
But we never see that part of it.
yeah, yeah.
We blaming Joe for what's going on is not necessarily the best attitude to take, I don't think. We need to look at
Well,
ourselves.
yeah, For sure. I mean, you see, it's always they talk about that with marriages, right? It's always the
Yeah,
small things that lead to divorce. And but the issue with small things is that, well, what are you doing that are small things that are helping to blow it up? You
right.
know, let alone your spouse, what they're doing, what are you doing that's those small things that you need to identify to improve upon
Yeah,
and change. You can change so that you can keep your union together, whether you're talking about a
right.
marriage or you're talking about a nation.
Right. You're right. You're absolutely correct. It's always is the small things that pile up and become a big thing,
Yep.
all balled into one thing. And you've got to separate them, deal with each one. And when you've done that, you've come up to a healthy union, whether it's marriage, like you said, or the
Hmm.
nation.
Yeah.
We've got to
Yeah. Nothing.
identify, we have to
No,
identify what are we doing as individuals to our country?
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, nothing's worse in a marriage than, one who dominates over the other. There's not really a
Yeah,
unity there. It's
no,
one
there
is
isn't.
feeling subjected to and one is dominating.
Yeah. I totally see your point that when you right now within the political spectrum today, what do you see as going to be beneficial to us bringing the country even a little closer
Well, I
with
think
the
the
political
one of the,
climate we have?
yeah, I think, look, at the end of the day, that is the challenge is, what can I do as an individual? When you look at the whole total scheme, it becomes challenging to
Yeah.
try to fix things. But again, I come back to the fact that it's up to the Lord to fix it. It begins with renewing. If you already are a follower of Christ, I think it comes back to renewing your devotion. You're consecrating
Mhm.
yourself. And that's interesting that after the Battle of Gettysburg, what do you see? You have Lincoln come to Gettysburg to deliver his famous appropriate words, remarks. And what does he call upon the people to do? To consecrate themselves, set themselves apart as sacred to the Lord,
Mhm.
to devote themselves afresh and anew. And I think that begins with that. I think there's so many areas in our own life that we say that we're devoted to the Lord, but we're devoted to ourselves. We're devoted to our own way of thinking, we're too self-reliant. I know for my own life, I'm way too self-reliant. And so it's all of these little areas. Again, you go and you climb back up on top of that uh, high ground of God's truth, and you determine of yourself and your will to stand firm and not
Yeah.
get knocked off of that high ground. And it begins with that.
Yeah.
It's what is that? Second Chronicles 7. If my people who are called by my name will repent and turn. That's
Mhm.
that's where it begins. But then it's on the Lord. He said, then I will heal their land. It's on the Lord from that point on, because it's so
Yeah.
big, it's so vast. What can one individual do? Well, the one individual just stand firm in God's truth. And if everyone
Mhm.
starts doing that, you will
Yeah.
see unity, you will see peace, you will see prosperity become, because God promises that if we stand on his word, on his truth, and we follow his will for the nation, for our own lives, we'll see that peace, we'll see that prosperity, and we will learn how to treat each other with respect and be able to
Mhm.
relate to each other with love and respect.
Yeah, every time you say that, stand on the hill of God, with God. I think of a phrase, and I don't remember where it comes from. I know it's in the Bible. I think it's in the New Testament. Put on the armor of God, the armor of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And every time you say, I think of that thing. That's what we all need to do: is put on the armor of God
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
stand
I
for
mean,
righteousness.
because at the core root, right, our enemy is not, it's Ephesians 6, I think is what you're referencing to. And in that same section, it says, our enemy is not flesh and blood. We do not fight against flesh and blood. It's a spiritual battle. it manifests itself in a physical way, but at its core root, it is a spiritual battle. And
Mhm.
and that's at the core root that we need to come to understand as well, that our neighbor is not our enemy. Our enemy is with, fighting within ourselves, the temptations that we face, but then our neighbor is facing temptations as well. And
Mhm.
the more that we're covering our neighbors in prayer and are, again, treating our neighbors with love and respect, and are building a rapport that we can have difficult but pleasant conversations about things that we may disagree upon, but we treat each other with love and respect, we start disarming the enemy's weapons that come against us,
Mhm.
because we're realizing that our neighbor is not our enemy.
Yeah.
That just as in the 19th century, that African American, that black man was not your enemy. You can
No.
have conversation. He's a man. He's a woman. He's equal. He sees things differently. He might look different than you, but that you're still a human being. You're still a man or a woman, and you
Right.
have common ground. But
Right.
you also have common ground in the fact that you're both facing temptations of
Right.
wanting things your way, doing things your way, and everyone else can just forget it. I don't care.
Yeah.
So
Let's
you're in
compromise.
this
Do
fight
it
the
my
battle,
way.
right?
Yeah.
And instead of
Let's
realizing you're
compromise.
fighting together, yeah,
Let's compromise and do it my way.
right,
Is what I say happens. Because
right.
I got a couple. I live in an independent living facility, assisted
Hmm.
living facility, and we got a couple of residents here that are just locking horns every day
Yeah,
because neither one of them are willing to look at the facts as they are. They want to listen to the rhetoric, they want to listen to the propaganda, they want to listen to all the nonsense of their respective groups, the Democrats and the Republicans. And that's basically what they're fighting. Trump and Biden. That's
right,
what they're fighting about. And they're good friends, but they cannot hold a civilized conversation about it.
right. And yet they're
And I,
friends.
yeah,
that's
they can talk
that's
about
the
everything. Yeah, they talk
right.
about other topics and don't get that way, like acting like 2-year-olds, but they get to talking. Now, I'm a political person, a political activist. My podcasts are just almost all about things like this. What do we do? How do we get out of here? What do
Right,
we do to get here? Well, we got here because we're human beings.
right.
We're
Well, and that's
fallible.
and that's the then that's the really the challenge, right? Is
Right.
admitting our wrongs, because that's the core root of the issue. Is we are fallen beings, and
Yep.
you're not going to have any kind of good conversations until you embrace the idea that you're as much of a part of the problem as that person that you're trying to talk to, that you see
Yeah.
as the problem.
Well, I sit there, listen to them, and stay out of it. And then when they get back to civilized conversation, I join in because
Right.
we sit at the same table all the time.
Uh-huh.
And to me, I think we need to have some type of discourse. I've done one, two, maybe three podcasts on race relations. I've got another one coming up here pretty soon if the guy accepts my invitation. Because I think it's important that we bring us together because what I see happening, and I've said this for decades, literally decades, that there's a war coming. It's not going to be a race war, not blacks against white. I don't see that happening.
Right.
What I see happening is the country becoming balkanized. California, Oregon, Washington versus Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico. So each little fiefdom has set themselves up as little fiefdoms, and then each segment's fighting each other. In fact, as they got a war out that kind of illustrates that. It's called War, and
Hmm.
it's about California invading Texas.
Okay.
And I'd like to see it. I haven't been able to see it, but that's basically what I'm talking about. Is California invades Texas because of political nonsense.
Right. And it could be. I mean, it's just identifying the way in which it happens, because
Mhm.
technically you already see it. It's
Yeah.
just along a culture. It's along
Mhm.
social bounds right now, and
Right.
to your point, I think we need to identify that now because this is our opportunity to curb it becoming a physical battle where
Yeah.
as compared to a social and a cultural one that we're facing right now.
Yeah. And we also got to learn how to deal with these extremist groups, BLM, Proud Boys, those types of groups. We need to learn how to bring them into the mainstream. And I don't see how we're going to be able to do that.
Yeah,
Good. They're
it's
so
all
radicalized.
yeah, but I thought it's interesting with all the groups because at the core root of it, you still see so many of the same similarities back to the days of
Yeah.
the Civil War. It's
Yeah.
they're just instead of instead of uh, Tennessee, the troops from Tennessee, you can say, and I'm not trying to make I'm not trying to make a correlation that people from Tennessee are Antifa, but I'm just trying to make it a point of the coalition of the Confederates. They're all kind of on the same wavelength. When
Mm,
you look at BLM or an Antifa or many of those kinds of groups,
yeah.
it's no different than a lot of the way it was a bunch of states that came together on either the side of the Confederacy or the side of the Union. You
Hmm.
see all these different factions. Um, they all were really kind of joined together in the same mindset and approach of things and their ultimate goals and ends. And they will say that it's about unity and it's all about uh, being one utopian society, but at the core root of it is there's always this small group that wants to determine what that looks like for everybody else. No
Hmm.
different than what you saw, with how people approached the blacks, the African
Yeah.
Americans, back during the days of the Civil War. They wanted to
Yeah.
determine if they're human beings or not, or what their lives are going to be like.
Yeah. And it was a lot of that struggle they had right after the Civil War during Reconstruction. We're still having today in the ghettos.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. That's
You
what I'm
know,
saying.
with
That Civil War never died. Really,
no,
it just kind of went into hiding for a bit, or just looked different.
well, we're not shooting each other, but we're still fighting the battles.
Yeah, yeah. Segregation.
Yep.
You're talking about Woodrow Wilson.
Yep.
You're the Ku Klux Klan. It's still the
Yeah.
same mindset, and so
Hmm.
that never got dealt with because they couldn't stand the thought of blacks having the same level of rights and liberties that they did. And I would say that we're not really in. Some people still have that same issue today, for
They
sure.
do.
We still have the Ku Klux Klan around. We still have
It was,
groups like that, but it's just looks different now. It's an academic. It's a credentialed one. It's those who have the titles by their names, looking down upon those who don't in many respects,
mm,
and it's the same mindset.
yeah, here's one thing that I know. We got all the intellectuals that you're talking about and all the other people. We outnumber them.
Yes.
But they
Yep.
are so but we have given them the power.
Yeah, because yeah, we have. I mean, it's we've bought into the idea in some respects that they know better. Then they have the tools around them, i.e., like media and also our education system that wants to
Yeah.
reinforce that idea that the only true people with wisdom and knowledge are those with the credentials, those who have the 4-year degrees, the doctorates or whatever.
Hmm.
And I found that to be that was really that in doing the research for this, I came across Mikhail Bakunin and his critique of Karl Marx, and he lays it all out there. And that's what really stuck out with me was when we got into 2020, and I'm not gonna dive into that. Don't need to necessarily with
No.
the coronavirus and all that kind of stuff. But if you look at what Bakunin's critique of Marx was, he goes, there would be a small elite group of counterfeit scientists and scholars,
Yep.
and we've been seeing it for the last at least 5 years, if not longer, where there's those who have gone through years of education, done all this research, all this study, and these other groups totally dismiss them as not having any knowledge whatsoever because they don't belong in that same group. And we saw that, I hate to say it, but it's true. We saw that back in 2020 where doctors were doing, their own prescription, using their own knowledge, their own experience to help combat illness and the virus, and because they were doing it differently than, i.e., the small group in the government or doctors wanted it to be done, then they're shunned. All of a sudden, these same doctors who maybe a couple of years prior were hailed or would be considered, in that same group, found themselves on the outside looking in because they just didn't follow the same policies and procedures for how they were to handle this virus.
Well, we don't need to go into corona.
Yeah, no,
the
we don't.
virus.
We'll leave that one alone.
We're talking about. It's not what we're talking about. Were any other battles, whether they were really significant, the ones we know about, Bull Run and Antietam and stuff like that, were any of those in any way similar to Gettysburg, as far as the spiritual background of it is concerned, or the basic causes of that particular battle at that particular time that you're aware of?
I think so. Going and diving, honestly, I spent more time looking at Gettysburg for sure, but I did have some time to look into Antietam just because it did set up, course of things. But then another one that stood out to me was Fredericksburg, which happened right before Gettysburg, a couple of months prior, right at the end of April. And I honestly believe the Lord had set the stage that could have been the turning point. The Union forces were in a much stronger position. Their numbers were strong. They had every reason to win that battle. And what you saw there is a sense of, there wasn't the devotion that you saw at Gettysburg, in my opinion. There wasn't this, I'm gonna do everything to the absolute best that I can. I felt that there was a breakdown in just tactical aspects, strategic awareness. And so what should have been a monumental victory, because of negligence here and there by a few main leaders, the opportunity was able to be turned in the favor of the Confederates, which, through some truly audacious and bold moves, but it should not have been that way. It shouldn't have gotten to that point. And so I think the Lord actually had set that up to be a major victory that could have been a turning point. And the same with Antietam. I talk about a story where they found the Confederate battle plans that led to Antietam they were wrapped around cigars, almost like victory cigars. Like, here you go, here's their plans, here's what they're looking to do. But McClellan, in his true nature of concern over his own reputation, not wanting to be wrong, instead of being bold in some respects, he was too concerned about what his life would be after the war, I think, that he was so cautious that here he had the plans in his hands and it took him too long to really implement them. And so what could have really been a major victory there at Antietam ended up, I mean, the Union still claimed it as a victory, but in my respects, it was a draw. It was the bloodiest single day battle of the war. And had Lee not withdrawn first, the Union couldn't have claimed it as a victory. So,
no,
it was still a victory for sure, but not the complete and overwhelming one like you see with like a Gettysburg, where you see that was a true turning of the tide. Like this is
right.
everything changed after Gettysburg. All the Union knew before that was defeat, a victory maybe here and there, a minor one, but filled with surrounded by a bunch of defeat. After Gettysburg, that totally changed.
Yeah. What was I going to say? Oh, well.
It happens.
Yeah, I'm at the age that I sometimes forget my own name. The other battles the Gettysburg was set up by the Lord, you believe. And I tend to agree with you that God set it up so that we would win. But McClellan, that's what I was going to say. McClellan, his goal was to be president.
Yeah.
That was his goal.
Instead it was his career first. Career first.
Right. Yeah. His goal was, once he got out of the military, was to become president. Traditionally, over the centuries that we've been a country, generals have made lousy presidents.
Well, he wouldn't have seen it that way, but it's
no, but if you look back at history and generals who became presidents, you'll see that it was pretty dismal. Their records are pretty dismal. And the one I think of, first of all, is Grant and Jackson.
Well, yeah. Jackson for sure, just because again, you have the same kind of a mindset that led to the Civil War anyway. And then I think Grant there is, I think it was, he was a general first and then a president second. I don't know that he was fully ready to embrace that role. And then you're coming in on the heels of the Civil War and, still going through Reconstruction and all that, those kinds of things. That would be a tough situation. And if you're not, I think, truly prepared for that position and what you have to deal with, handing out orders in the military compared to trying to navigate the political sphere are two entirely different things,
Yeah, so, even Eisenhower was pretty much of an not very effective president. He got a lot done, but not as much as he could have.
Yeah.
Because he was a general first and president second.
Right. He's not used to that sphere, which is nice. I like having leaders who are not that comfortable in that political sphere, but you want someone who's ready to navigate it though, and ready to know how to fight, ready to take on that fight.
Take on that, and we need religious leaders that will stand up and start saying what you're saying.
Yeah,
take the higher ground with Jesus.
Yeah, that's exactly what really finally led to the Civil War in the first place. Was those on the side of abolition, those on the side of, you'd say, our traditional constitution-based government, realized that they were the ones doing all the compromising. They weren't getting anywhere really with the South. Like they weren't willing to compromise or give up on, because that meant taking away their identity. So as soon as you start challenging somebody's identity, you've got a whole nother fight, on your hands. And until you're aware of that, you're not going to really make any inroads on things. And I think that's what finally started to change when you get into the 1850s. You started seeing a lot more of the politicians on the side of abolition and in the northern states, they started to actually just put their foot down and say, well, we're not giving any more ground because this is getting
Yeah.
ridiculous. You guys are figuring out ways of getting around our compromises, and you're abusing our desire to keep unity here. You're abusing it. So we're done. We're just absolutely done. And then that's when Lincoln was elected, that was the sign for the South. Like, okay, they're legitimately done. This is we're not going to be able to get anywhere with them really anymore.
Yeah, I had a question that went out of my mind before while you were talking. Maybe to come back. The wars we fight today are political wars. Vietnam, for example, was political, totally. In my opinion, anyway. But I read somewhere that the abolitionists were gaining in strength even in the South. There was a few of them.
Yeah, it is true. Yeah, it's true. They were gaining strength. Slavery was actually a dying industry.
Yes.
Until we started really the rapid expansion westward was really was great for the country and yet not great for the country, because when we started gaining all the territory out west, it allowed the slavery to spread, and we had really curbed a lot of the influx of slavery through shipping.
Mm-hmm.
But what was happening now is you had a lot of those same slave owners moving out west, or family moving out west. Well, now you've got so much more land in which to farm and to take care of without eating into profits. So what's the most economical way of doing that? Well, let's get back to slavery again. And so then slavery became a homegrown issue. And we didn't need to import them. We were
breeding them.
I wasn't going to say the word, but you did it. So
there were slave owners in the South that I believe I've read that did nothing but breed slaves. Yeah, that's what they did.
And no problem splitting families up, and
which is of course wrong.
Oh yeah, it's. But again, if they're not fully human being, if you don't see them as an equal member and citizen of your society, you have no problem doing that.
But slavery is a zero-sum game.
Yeah. At some point in time, it comes back around on you too. There's a zero sum.
We're getting close to running out of time here. What was the name of that book again?
It's A Nation at a Crossroads. Gettysburg A Nation at a Crossroads.
At a cross.
And then subtitle is Gettysburg for Yesterday and Today. You can find it at on Amazon, Barnes and Noble.
Well, what I normally do, and that's a lot, I'm going to have to do it a little bit different. I've got a new way of doing things. But I usually put the book right across the top of your head, but that's a little much to put it, don't do that. But I'll put it I'll record a show note and put that printed so it'll not only be spoken by me, but it will also be across me. Have me swallow so I get all that on there for you before I do the ending of the podcast when I record it. Right now, I'm a little short on space to put you up there, so it's going to be a while before I get you published.
That's fine.
I apologize for that.
It's okay.
Do you have any parting words?
Do
you have any parting words?
Oh, no, I just, I think if I can leave anybody with some words is, this book isn't just about talking about Gettysburg and leaving you with just facts and some interesting thoughts on the battle or even where we're at today. It very much, I think, people want to know what they can do, and that's what I try to do in this book is show the parallels so that we learn the lesson. Because I believe if you look at the Battle of Gettysburg itself, and I do this at the end, if you look at the battle, I believe that there are principles and some steps that every individual can take in their personal lives, that if we all did this, we would see this nation changed and renewed. And there's hope. There's hope, but it begins with standing firm on God's truth.
I can't give up on hope. I just don't believe in giving up on hope because it's there. With
Absolutely.
God's help, we'll get through this.
As
Jeremy,
long as
thank you so
you're
much for being a part of the show. I really appreciate it. You've done an excellent job and you really clarify a few things for me, which is part of the reason I do the podcast, so I can learn. But
absolutely.
thank you very much. I'm going to turn off the recording and if you'll just hang around for a second.
Sure.